This is Stephen Nojiri, and this is another video in the Tada Genji tradition series. This video is going to look at swords. In a previous video, I explained how the bow and the arrow are the main weapons of the Tada Genji tradition. We discussed that the Tada Genji tradition has bows with all the different types of bows, all the different type of arrowheads, and that the bow has a spiritual level to it. The bow can also be used as an object to dispel evil spirits, etc., etc. If you haven't watched the bow video, you should have. It is sort of a prerequisite to this video, so you should go watch that video first if you haven't. So the bow is the main weapon of the Tada Genji tradition. In that video I also said swords are a secondary tool or a secondary implement. And that's what we're going to discuss now. So swords as secondary tools, there's a horseback version and an on-foot version. And then swords as ritual items, as amulets and fulfillment of magical spells. So let's look at the swords as the secondary tool. So it falls under something called the 6 minor tools. Let's go back for a minute. In the Tada Genji tradition, there is a teaching called the 6 major tools and the 6 minor tools. Now the word tool here doesn't exactly corroborate to the English concept of tool. You can say tool, you could say instrument, implement, but tool is kind of the easiest one to utilize. So for the simplicity's sake, we say the 6 major tools or the 6 minor tools, or you could say the 6 major implements or the 6 minor implements. Either English word is fine. So the 6 major and the 6 minor section, the teaching of the 6 major and the 6 minor, swords come in as one of the minor tools, one of the minor instruments. So there's 6 items that are actually considered absolutely crucial for the bushi, and then there are the 6 tools which are incredibly useful. You need them, but they are minor, they are lesser. So swords don't even come into the major tools, they actually come into the minor tools. And when I eventually make a video on the 6 major and the 6 minor, I think it will open the eyes of a lot of people about what is considered the level of importance of equipment for a bushi. But right now we're talking about swords, so swords come in under the 6 minor tools. So now let's look at the horseback version, because remember, there's the horseback version and then there's the on-foot version. So in the horseback version, you need the long sword, your sort of traditional tachi, your horseback curved sword. And this isn't just a curved sword. This is all the teachings come in here about all the different cords that you use, cords that you tie on this, and we could get into that later. But it's the sword, but it's also all the cords that come with the sword. And then, for example, there's a cord that you can put on the sword, and you can hold it in your mouth, things like that. There's an entire section here about the long sword. So the teaching is basically using a long curved sword on horseback, and the cords that go with that is also a section there. And then the second part is a fighting sword, a smaller bladed weapon for defense. Now that's if you are knocked off the horse and you have to defend yourself. It's also for finishing off an opponent. If you were to hop off your horse and finish an opponent off, the tachi, the longer sword, it's good for swipes. But if you have to actually fight someone, that sword is really not ideal. So the long sword, the tachi, is for horseback swipes, and then when you're off of the horse, you need a smaller sword for defense. That could be everything from just a smaller fighting katana to a small dagger. It doesn't specify exactly the length. It's just not your long curved sword that you swipe on the back of the horse. So what we see here specifically is the pattern of a large blade and a small blade being used for two distinct purposes. And continuing with the large and small pattern, we have the on foot version, which is a fighting sword of normal length, that's your long sword, and then any shorter bladed weapon, that would be your small. Now that could be goshigatana, uchigatana, tanto. It doesn't matter whether what the length of the blade is, what the length of the handle is, etc., etc., etc. These things aren't specific. It's just that you have sort of your normal length fighting blade, which is what most of you guys listening would just, that's your quote unquote stereotypical katana. And then anything that has a shorter blade, it could be a short blade with a normal length handle. It could be a wakizashi, a short blade with a short handle. It could be a dagger, just it's any shorter secondary weapon. It could even be a slightly different weapon, like you could have a normal length katana, and then you could have like something like a kabuto wari. Is the idea is that you have your fighting sword, and then you have your secondary weapon, a shorter blade, a trunch, like a even like again like a goshi, a kabuto wari, something like that. That's the principle here, is large, small, large, small. So this is the where the concept of the daisho comes in, but it is not the stereotypical daisho set that everyone is used to seeing. Everyone's used to seeing a standard katana and a standard wakizashi as the daisho set. But this is not following that rule. You just need one big, one small. And what the big is and what the small is really up to you, as long as you have one large, one small. And the idea is that you have the large is your standard fighting weapon, and then the small is for like alternate scenarios. So when you're on horseback, you have your curved large tachi for swinging, and then you have a shorter striking katana for when you get knocked off your horse or have to hop off your horse for any reason. And then when you're on foot, you have a standard striking katana, or what you guys know as a traditional typical katana. But then you have to have another weapon that is smaller than that sword, and again, usually it can be a dagger, it could be a short bladed katana, it could be a wakizashi, as long as it's quote unquote smaller than your normal length fighting blade. So now that we've looked at it as a fighting instrument, let's look at it as an amulet or a ritual item. In this section, swords are created to complete a vision. So maybe a deity has appeared and said, you have to do X, Y, Z, da 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 da. And part of this, is of making this happen is you also have to make this sword for some reason. They are also created to ward off evil forces. So when a sword is created to complete a vision, or the sword is created to ward off evil forces, or it's made for some sort of magical ritual purpose, once it has fulfilled the purpose, usually it can be used for a weapon. And like I said, it's usually afterwards. There's a couple instances where the sword is in the process of fulfilling its purpose and it gets used as a weapon, but usually it's used as a weapon after it's fulfilled its purpose. We can also see the swords being used as given as offerings, to the dragon gods, to the ocean, the ritual offering of an item. There's something is happening, so the sword is thrown into the water, or the sword is thrown from the cliff, things like that, etc., etc. We also see swords sort of given as trade or treaty items. There's several instances through history where somebody gave a sword as a token of friendship, or as a token of promise. We also see swords being used as amulets to hold a power in check. Once the sword is used to hold a power in check, like hold an evil spirit to a place or suppress an evil spirit into a particular location, at that point the sword is expected to never be used. It literally sits as a reservoir. It either suppresses an evil spirit as like a seal, or it holds some kind of blessing. But once that kind of once it becomes that kind of holding power amulet, it's not really supposed to be used after that. So we're going to look at two examples. The first example is the Imperial Sword, the regalia, the sword from the Imperial regalia. It's a ritual item. While it was used as a weapon tool, its true purpose is a regalia. I mean, that's 99% of the time it is regalia, it is a ritual item. It's not meant for fighting. It's meant to be part of the imperial regalia. Then there is another sword, the Oni cutter. That is a Tada Genji blade, and it is used as a protective charm for imperial service, but it was also used in combat. So let's take a look at the Oni cutter in a little bit more detail. So the legend of the demon cutter, the legend, aka the beard cutter. Now this sword is not a legend. When I say legend, I only say that because there's ritual, magical, fantastical history related to it. But the demon cutter, the beard cutter, is a real sword, and it still exists to this day. So let's look briefly at this sword. So this sword was forged by decree from Hachiman Daibosatsu to Genji Mitsunaka. So Genji Mitsunaka had a vision where Hachiman Daibosatsu exactly explained how to create this blade, and that this blade was going to be used to defend the emperor, to defend the empire. Now this sword, once it was formed, has two names that come with it. It is known as the beard cutter, and it is known as the Oni cutter. Now, beard cutter comes from an incident where it was used when they tested the blade out. They cut through a criminal's neck, right? And the guy had a beard, and when it cut through the neck, but it also cut through the beard, and everyone was amazed. So it was named the beard cutter. But it's also named the Oni cutter. Now, why it's named the Oni cutter? There's two sort of versions of this. The traditional sort of normal version is that this blade was used to cut the arm off of a demon, and ever since it cut the arm off the demon, it's the Oni cutter. However, within the Tada Genji tradition, it is saying that it was already named the demon cutter because in this case, demon or Oni is anything that opposes the imperial house. Anything that opposes the emperor is Oni, is demon, and so this sword was created to cut to destroy, to cut negative forces against the emperor, and that's why it was named Oni cutter. Now this sword was renamed many times as it was passed down through history. It eventually ended into the hands of Genji Yoritomo, and on the chart I accidentally wrote Yoritomi, my mistake, but it should be Yoritomo. Renamed many times until Hachiman appeared to Yoritomo, and Hachiman said that the sword name needed to be renamed back to beard cutter or Oni cutter. It had taken on so many names that the name itself had lost its power because people were calling it things that had nothing to do with its origin. So Hachiman said change the name back. So Yoritomo changed the name back. Interestingly enough, when this sword was made, it had a companion sword with it called the Hizamaru. And when Yoritomo changed the name back, he also acquired the Hizamaru, and he brought the two swords together again. And it's said that by bringing the Hizamaru together and bringing the beard cutter together is one of the things that allowed him to be so successful. So the beard cutter now rests in the Kitano Tenmangu shrine as part of the suppression of negative forces. If you're not familiar with what a Tenmangu shrine is, it's a little complicated, but basically it's about suppressing a particular negative spirit. I won't. This video is already getting too long, so I'm not going to go into the history of that. But the Tenmangu is basically related to suppressing a particular negative spirit. So the beard cutter going to the Kitano Tenmangu shrine makes it is now enshrined there as part of suppressing this particular negative force. The Hizamaru, unfortunately, the Hizamaru went to Nita Yoshisada, and then after he died, it ended up in the hands of the House of Mogami. But after that, I don't think anybody really knows where it's at now. So that's the end of this particular legend. Or this, not legend, but history. So in conclusion, within the Tada Genji tradition, I've explained swords are secondary tools, secondary weapons. You need a large one and you need a shorter one. There's a set for horseback, there's a set for on foot. But the principle is you need a large one and you need a short one. If you're going on horseback, you need a long curved tachi and a shorter fighting blade. And if you're on foot, you need a standard fighting blade and you need some shorter version, some shorter weapon. Swords are also ritual implements used to fulfill some magical ritual purpose and to protect, ward off, suppress evil. And that is it for this video. As always, these videos are meant to be brief and they are meant to inspire you or to give you a starting off point. The material in this video is copywritten by me, so please do not steal this material. Please do not take it. Please do not copy it. Again, I hope it inspires you. I hope that it sets you off on your own investigations and explorations, but please be respectful.